Welcome to the next section of your training, which will be looking at the foundations to FX trading and what things you need to be focusing on in order to really kickstart your career as a professional trader. Now, to do this, we'll be looking at a few crucial components that will be the structure of your entire professional career in this business. Now, in the Institution of Fundamentals module so far, we've given you a comprehensive understanding of the markets as a whole, the role we play as speculators in those markets, along with the entire basic principles of what FX trading is and how professionals approach it. Now, in this video, we're going to look at the 4 pillars of successful trading, why they're so vital for your success, and most importantly, how you should approach your learning of all 4. So let's begin by looking at these 4 pillars of successful trading and how we can understand them better. Now, these pillars will be the foundation of your entire trading career from this point forward. And they are fundamental analysis, trading psychology, risk management, and finally, technical analysis. So let's begin with fundamental analysis and understand exactly what this means when trading the FX markets in particular. In a nutshell, the fundamentals are simply understanding the reasons why the market is moving rather than just identifying that the move has happened. When we understand why something is happening, we suddenly have much more confidence in what we're doing, and if we can interpret how the market is thinking, then we have the potential for predicting which way it will go next. For example, if there's a very good reason for the market to be scared, then the price will likely fall, and vice versa if there's a very good reason for the market to be confident of chasing profits. You can obviously see how having this information offers a huge potential to improve your trading performance. Now, in order to understand this concept fully, we're going to start by looking at some of the most common objections that people have when it comes to trading with the fundamentals as their main guide. The first objection is that you only need to look at the chart and that applying fundamentals is irrelevant and unnecessary. This is incorrect for several reasons. In the main study program, you will hear me speak about the example of technical analysis being like driving a car, but only using the rear view mirror to navigate your journey. It will work sometimes, like on a really long straight road, but overall it's useless and you just wouldn't do it. Another logical point to consider is that all professional traders use very specific tools like the Bloomberg Terminal or Reuters Icon. These are very famous terminals which I'm sure you've heard of. They are built specifically to get news and information to traders as fast and efficiently as possible. The cost of the Bloomberg Terminal is around $2,000 per month and comes with a 2-year contract. So in order to have it, you've basically got to spend $48,000 right off the bat. Why would these fundamental tools be so expensive if big funds and professional traders made their money staring at price charts and indicators which can be found for free in most places? It just doesn't add up that this stuff is unnecessary when so many professionals are paying such high prices to get this type of information. The next objection people have, particularly retail traders, is that fundamental trading is hard and too complicated to understand unless you trained at a bank or have some fancy genius level degree. Again, by the end of this video, I'll show you that fundamental is actually simpler than technicals if you know what to focus on and what to look for. Another closely related objection is that all news is priced in. Now, this is related because understanding the news is a huge part of trading the fundamentals, and many so-called experts teach a belief called efficient market hypothesis, or EMH for short. EMH states that all available information is priced in, thus any moves in the market are totally random, and it's therefore impossible to make a consistent profit over time. In a very short illustration, I will demonstrate why this is complete nonsense and that anyone who perpetuates this myth has probably never even tried to trade successfully. The example I'm going to use is that of the Bank of Japan's quantitative easing program, which was launched in April 2013. This program basically involved the almost unlimited printing of Japanese yen in order to devalue the currency and encourage inflation and growth in the Japanese economy. Of course, according to the basic laws of supply and demand, when there's an oversupply of something, the price falls, and the same is true of currencies. So, when the program was launched, there's a very high expectation from analysts and even the central bank themselves that the value of the Japanese yen would fall over the following months. The overall expectation was that the pressure of this QE program would eventually lead to the currency falling all the way to 110 against the US dollar. This is very well documented, but when the program was launched, the price did not fall that far for over a year. It took around 15 months for that piece of news to get fully priced into the markets. This, of course, allowed traders plenty of opportunities to get in and take advantage of this move without worrying about missing it on the first day. Now, there are also many more examples, even on short-term day trades, of times when the news is not fully priced in immediately, which gives us a chance to see what's going on and get in to take advantage. These tend to be the most common reservations that people have when approaching the fundamentals. But as we have shown, there's really no need to be concerned about these things, because what I'm about to show you next will allow you to see for yourself how simple and how powerful the fundamentals really are. So let's take a look at some information that will give you a nice introduction to those fundamentals. The first thing we need to look at is the role played by central banks. Now, a central bank is an institution that's responsible for the setting of a country's monetary policy, and what that means is it's their job to make sure the economy is stable and growing. For example, the Federal Reserve is the central bank of the US, the ECB is the central bank of Europe, and the Bank of England, of course, is the bank for the UK, and so on. All developed nations have a central bank, and the actions of the central bank directly influence the price movements of the country's currency. This is why central banks are so important to watch for all forex traders. Everything they do impacts the trades we take and how we navigate the markets. Now, let's remember that this process is actually quite simple. So before we get carried away worrying about all the policies and intricacies of the central bank, all we really need to understand is that what the bank is thinking at any given time. We will explain this further as we go, but for now it's important to appreciate that when analysing a central bank, there is usually only one or maybe two things we need to be looking at. So, why do we need to know what the central bank is thinking? Well, if we know what they're thinking, what they are happy with, what they are unhappy with, we can use that information to try and predict what they might do next. And these actions will move the price of the respective currencies, thus giving us good trading opportunities. This is the overall theme that I want you to have in your mind as we go through this presentation. So first of all, we need to be looking at the same things the central bank looks at when deciding if they need to be concerned or happy about the current state of the economy. The things that the bank looks at are called economic indicators. These indicators, as the name suggests, literally indicate which parts of the economy are doing well and which parts need some input from the bank. So what indicators do the banks use to gauge the state of the economy? Well, let's take a look so that we can understand exactly what they mean and how they impact the bank's view. So, there are four main indicators you need to be aware of in simple terms. The first one is production, and all that measures is the amount of things a country makes or produces. So this includes sub-indicators like manufacturing, housing, construction, and so on. These indicators allow the bank to see how much is being added to the economy and whether the nation is being as productive as they would like or not. The next indicator is employment. This, of course, measures things like how many people are in work, the percentage of people that are unemployed, and how much the rate that people earn is increasing or decreasing. Employment includes sub-indicators like average earnings, unemployment rate, claimant count, and so on. So unemployment figures are also something that the bank is paying close attention to. Now, following on from that, we have growth. The most popular growth indicator is, of course, GDP. This is similar to production, but gives a more overall picture of how well the economy is expanding. This gives the bank a very good idea about whether or not any actions are required. Finally, we have inflation, and this is probably the most important of them all. Inflation measures how much the cost of goods and services goes up or down over time. And the reason it's so important is because very often the central bank's main purpose is to ensure that the inflation rate remains stable. For most developed nations, the optimal rate of inflation is about 2% a year. So if it falls below this or goes above it, the bank must then step in to act. They will also have a mandate for growth, and again, in most developed nations, as long as GDP is around 2 to 3%, then the bank will be happy. So each bank has its policy mandate, and they then monitor the economic indicators to determine whether or not action is needed. So, As traders, we want to also be watching these indicators very closely, because if we can see that the central bank is not quite reaching their target, then we can safely assume that they have to act and get into the market as early as possible to take advantage of the moves caused by these actions. Now, before we take a look at the tools the central bank has at their disposal, we need to just quickly discuss one other indicator that can be very useful to us as traders. And the indicator is geopolitical events. Now, this isn't necessarily economic, but it's certainly something that can cause risk in the market. For example, a biggest illustration of a geopolitical event is a conflict between two nations, a war. This type of event will create a lot of uncertainty in the markets, which in turn causes large amounts of volatility in the price. These events are important because they can dictate the value of the nation's currency quite strongly. For example, if a country went to war, would you want to invest your money into that country? The answer, of course, is probably not. So geopolitical events are definitely something we need to keep an eye on, along with the central bank's main indicators. Okay, so now we know what the central bank is looking at, and also that we should be looking at these things as well. What happens when the central bank needs to act? What happens when inflation is below its target rate, or when GDP slips into negative territory? Well, next, we'll look at the tools the central bank has and how they use these tools to turn the economy around. Now, the first tool we'll look at is also the most important because it's generally considered to be one of the primary things a central bank uses in order to manage the economy. The tool we're talking about is interest rates. Now, interest rates specifically are generally used to control inflation. So if inflation is increasing too fast, the bank will increase interest rates. This ultimately encourages people to stop spending and start saving their money, which in turn reduces the rate at which inflation goes up. On the other hand, if inflation is very low and falling, the bank will cut its interest rate, which in turn will discourage people from holding their money in savings accounts and encourage them instead to spend, along with incentivising other people to borrow money, which they can then invest. This investment then gets the economy growing again and inflation starts to pick up. Interest rates are important, and anything that causes us to think the bank may change its interest rate can provide some very good trading opportunities. Now, the next tool the bank can use is something called price control. A price control is when the bank tells the market that it desires the currency to be at a specific level. Sometimes the bank just communicates this and threatens to act if the price moves too far away from the target, and other times the bank will provide a very specific price level and make it clear that each time the actual price looks like breaching that price, they will physically step in and intervene to keep it there. An example of this was when the Swiss National Bank had a price floor for the euro-Swiss currency pair between 2011 and 2015. They didn't want the Swiss franc appreciating against the euro, so they imposed a floor on the pair at 120. If the price broke below 120, they would step in and intervene by literally buying up the pair, sometimes buying billions of euros to do this and make sure the market didn't go below that crucial 120 level. Now, just think about this type of opportunity as a trader. If you have a central bank backing a trade, then it can create a very interesting opportunity with very little risk, because a central bank can print money, but the market cannot. So generally, the bank will always win the battle. Now, the caveat to this is at the end of 2014, the bank removed the floor unexpectedly, which sent the market into chaos as it tried to find a new fair value for Euro-Swiss pair. It actually dropped almost 40%. So the risk to these type of opportunities is clear, but the point I'm making is that it's important to understand the tools the banks use and how they can present trading opportunities. Fixed price controls, such as the one the SNB used, are rare, but less formal versions are much more common, and very often banks will dictate where they would like their currency to be. And this actually leads us very nicely to the next tool the banks use. The tool I'm talking about is central bank language. As you might have guessed, language is simply the things the bank says rather than what it actually does. By making these statements about what it would like the market to do and where it would like the price of its currency to be, the bank hopes that the market will take the message as sufficient threat of action and trade in line with it. This is why credibility is so vital to a central bank. If the market doesn't believe that it will follow through on its threats, if it needs to, then the central bank loses its influence and has a much tougher job in dictating monetary policy. Now, most of the time this works, but sometimes it doesn't. And it's at these times that the bank may have to step in and act. Now, there's one more tool that the bank uses, but it's only rarely been used significantly since the global financial crisis of 2007. The tool I'm talking about is quantitative easing. And the reason it's last on the list is because it's viewed as an unconventional policy that many banks use only as a last resort. So what is QE? Well, to keep it simple, quantitative easing, or QE as we call it, is the process of the central bank printing money and then injecting this money into the financial system. This serves the purpose of stimulating growth and investment with so much fresh, cheap money around, and also devaluing the currency via the simple economics of supply and demand. This currency devaluation further supports growth as a country's exporters become much more competitive, which is good for the economy overall. Generally, QE is extremely effective, so when the bank threatens it or actually implements it, the market sits up and pays very close attention, and generally, the desired effects are reached over time. Now, when a central bank implements these tools, it gives us traders opportunities to make a profit. So all you need to do is be tuned into what is going on with the indicators and then listen to what the central bank is saying. This will prepare you extremely well to see any opportunities that arise. Now, you might be sitting there thinking that it all sounds very simple and you get the concept and you understand that it's the central bank's actions that cause most of the moves in the markets, but you're probably wondering, how can I figure out exactly what the bank is thinking of doing? Surely this is vital if they play such a big role in the markets, and you'd be absolutely correct. And again, this is a fairly simple process because the central bank will very rarely focus on more than one or two specific things at any given time. So this makes it much easier to track and much easier to understand. For example, if the bank is worried about inflation being too low, they will express this concern, and as traders, we know there's a good chance that they will cut interest rates in order to combat the falling inflation rate. In this scenario, we can forget all about GDP or employment because we know that the bank is now looking at low inflation. So we can ourselves focus on this data and also the possibility of them using tools associated with the problem, which in this case would be interest rate cuts. We can then determine how that action would impact the price of the currency and trade in the correct way. So if we focus on what the bank is focusing on, our trading becomes much simpler. The purpose of this presentation here is just to illustrate how simple the process is. Focus on the indicators, focus on the central bank, and once we know what they're focusing on, we can then figure out what tools they could possibly use and how it will impact the markets. So now the next step is finding the information so we can then follow along with what the banks are thinking. So what I'm going to do is go over some very good free resources that you should bookmark and use in your personal research to keep up to date with what the banks are thinking on a daily basis. Now obviously, as a professional trading firm, we use many different resources that are all designed to get the news to our traders as fast as possible. And we spoke earlier about how much these premium feeds cost. But there are also many solid free sources of analysis and information that you will need to follow as you go along. So the best free feeds that you can go away and start researching every day right now are as follows. The first one is Bloomberg.com. Bloomberg, of course, very famous, very popular. Now, Bloomberg.com, particularly the currency section, is not just all of Bloomberg News. We're looking at Bloomberg's currency section specifically, which is freely available online. The next one is ForexLive.com. Now, the main use of this site is the analysis provided. This analysis not only gives you the information, but also the interpretation from some really great analysts in the FX industry. We also have centralbanknews.info. This final one is a very good source for keeping directly tuned into what each central bank is doing and also highlighting the related articles written. These articles are great sources of information on all things related to the central banks. So let's just go through each one of these in a bit more detail and just briefly outline how to use these tools so they can help us figure out what the central banks are thinking. So with Bloomberg, all we need to do is read the articles in the currencies section. But all we're looking for is 4 things. If the article doesn't contain all of these 4 things, we can disregard it. If it does contain these 4 things, there is something in there that we can trade. So let's have a look. So number 1 is we need the currency pair. This will usually be in the headline, but basically which currency pair is the article talking about? Fairly simple. Number 2, we then need the direction. Is the currency pair going up or is the currency pair going down? Again, very simple and will probably be in the headline. The third one is that we then read the article for the reasons for the move. We just want to know why it's moving. If the article says the New Zealand dollar went down today and there's no reason for it, it just went down today, then we're not interested in that. we want to know a reason. For example, the New Zealand dollar went down today because the Bank of New Zealand cut its interest rate. That's a reason. That's a fundamental reason. So basically, we want to look for those reasons. And finally, we want an analyst expectation. The New Zealand dollar went down today because the central bank cut its interest rates. Analysts now expect the pair to reach 80 cents by the end of summer. Now we've got the analysts' expectations that have given us kind of a framework or a guideline of which prices are important. They're not always going to be accurate, they're not always going to be true, but it's just a good idea to see how far we can expect it to rise or fall, and it just gives us a good visualization of how to trade that currency over the coming months. And again, they'll give a time limit, so it may be 3 months or 6 months or a year. So you've got a very rough idea of how long we can expect that move to continue. So when reading Bloomberg, try and keep your focus on those 4 things, and you'll be able to get the best points from each article that you're looking at. Now the next one we looked at, of course, is forexlive.com. Now the purpose of this is to give us almost real-time filtered news, and the most important thing is the analysis. So if something happens, for example, if you're trading the New Zealand dollar and it suddenly goes down, you don't have to wait 5 or 6 hours for Bloomberg to write an article about it. You kind of need to know what's going on. Forex Live will be where you can find out quicker. Generally, each post is released just a few minutes after the event, allowing you much more up-to-date picture of what's going on. Now, the other great thing about this site, and the main thing for you, is that they are Forex specific and also have a dedicated central bank filter, allowing you to just look out for any central bank related news immediately. And of course, as we've already mentioned, they also add in the extra layer of analysis and information that really helps with the interpretation of these events, which of course is especially useful for you at the beginning of your new career. The final one, of course, is centralbanknews.info, which of course is a fantastic site that allows you to get right into exactly what all the major news sources have been reporting regarding what is happening with the world's central banks. Now, these free resources should not be underestimated, and even when we introduce you to our premium news feeds and research, they should still be part of your regular routine. So hopefully now you can see that trading fundamentals is a vital component, but also fairly straightforward. And in the main study program, we're going to build on this even further until you're 100% confident and understand everything about this concept in full.